Good. America, my name is Osei-Frimpong, and you're watching a special edition of the Black Athenians. I'm coming to you live, as I do sometimes, because I think I just did a segment on Rising where I talked about liberal anti-politics, and I think it was good enough for me to tell the people. So I'm going to tell you and flesh out some of the arguments I didn't get to in full detail at the time. All right, so you get a special, get a double dose of irony this week. All right, so what's liberal anti-politics? So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to gather around people. I'm going to tell you a story about America, not just America. I'm going to tell you a story about freedom. All right, so we're born into this world. We have a lot of constraints. We can't do anything. We can't feed ourselves. We can't even move. All of what we do entails us working with other people, usually a parent, right? Like we can't do anything for ourselves, right? So the world is hostile. We need help overcoming constraints. All we can do is like whine when we don't get what we want, right? So writ large, what that means as you grow older, we kind of organize, how we help each other overcome constraints. Some of them are imposed by nature. Others of them are imposed by convention. I personally have a constraint that I can't get nicer equipment that works all the time, which is why I would like you to, go to www.thefunkyacademic.com and pay for me and sign up for $5, $15, or $50 a month so that I can outstrip the constraint, which is my, mostly appropriate equipment, but sometimes dodgy equipment. All right, so that is a constraint I would like to overcome. And so we work through society to decide which constraints are appropriate to overcome, and then who does the work of risking and working to actually overcome them and how that's arranged for the whole. We want to fund cancer. Okay. We want to go to the space. We want to go to the moon. Okay. We decide how to do that. Now, in pre-modern times, those decisions, what you did for your life and how you got meaning through your life by realizing yourself above and beyond constraints, those decisions were made by convention, right? Received convention. You were a butcher because your parents were butcher. You were a baker because your parents were a baker. You joined the military because your parents joined the military. That was just what the community expected of you, so you did it. Or by divine command. Church wanted you to do this, so you did it. Right? That was the source of all legitimacy, some sort of received determination of what your role was. And freedom was the ability to do your role as determined by somebody else. If you couldn't do your role as determined by somebody else, then you weren't free. But as long as you could do your role as determined by somebody else, then you were free. Change that with modernity. That became, freedom became an issue of not being able to do your role as determined by someone else, but being able to do your role as determined by you. We still had problems to solve as a community, what constitutes a religion versus a cult, what needs to be produced in general, and then by whom. How did all this work get done, and who risks for the sake of the city, who risks and fights and keeps everything kind of internal. We have all of these issues that still need to be solved, but now who solves them isn't a matter of received command, rather it's a matter of self-government. We decide what needs to be done and what constraints matter, what gets identified as a constraint. Like currently, universal childcare is not identified as a constraint. Some people would say that's a huge burden of freedom. A huge problem for freedom. The fact that we don't have universal childcare. Some people think that abortion or the access to an abortion doctor is a constraint. And that's a huge problem of freedom. So that we should support and provide abortion doctors. Some people think that instead of universal childcare, I think you should do like the universal childcare first and a whole lot of other things that make life easier for, young parents and then worry about abortions. But I'm pro-choice. I just think that we could do a whole lot to avoid punishing women for punishing people and disproportionate women for getting pregnant. So I think we could just be better with young families. So we have these constraints. We come together as a society to figure out how to overcome those constraints. And now, as a matter of self-government, we decide how we overcome the constraints. It's not determined for us which constraints are our own responsibility and how to overcome them. Right? That's supposed to be self-government. However, liberals took this idea that you should only do what you consent to do, and what you consent to do is what you ought to do, a little bit too seriously, and now feel unbounded by all conventions. It's freedom as flakiness, right? They feel unbound by all conventions, which means I can tell you I'm going to meet you at 9 o'clock, and then at 8:45, tell somebody else I'm going to meet them across town, right? That's liberalism. And if you say like, well, you told me you were going to meet me, I made plans based on you like meeting me, you can say, well, that's oppression. You shouldn't hold me accountable for what I said I was going to do. That's liberalism. It finds its ugliest and probably most costly expression, one of the most costly expressions, in like no-fault divorce. And by the way, that always affects the kids and usually your finances. Don't let some liberal tell you some nonsense about how that's not the case. Divorce is for rich people. I meet more 60-year-old 3 and 4 times married rich white women than that's a whole divorce demographic. I had no idea they exist. They're divorced 3 and 4 times because marriage is for wealthy people. So like you got these white women who are married like 4 times. I didn't know they existed, but they totally exist. And it's all over like a professional class. It's all over class. Like by the time you're married 3 or 4 times, like that's a class marker. Poor people can't afford to get divorced that many times. But yeah, I find all of these semi-wealthy white women in their 50s who've been married like a ton. And it just kind of, anyway, that's liberalism. They all vote Democrat, right? So like that's liberalism. They shouldn't be bound by any convention, even the conventions they put under themselves. So liberalism emerged to deal with external conventions, allow for self-government, but then it sustains itself by by just casting off all conventions. And that's why, including meaning-making conventions, right? So, and this is how you get to anti-politics around certain issues that liberals hold dear. For example, healthcare, right? Healthcare is an anti-political issue. Like, you deal with healthcare in order to for health not to be a problem, to not be distracted by health. You don't deal with healthcare because you get meaning out of your colonoscopy. Having had one, my colonoscopy was a bit of a spiritual experience because I said no to the drugs. I've never actually had like drugs, so I just said no to them, and I had it au natural. So that was a bit of a spiritual experience, but for the most part, it's not really a meaning-making experience for most people. It's just something you do so that you can do other things that are meaningful. You know what's not like that? Government. What's not like that? Marriage. What's not like that? Church. Church is those things are what you do when you realize yourself like meaningfully through the institution. It's not something you do to get away, like health. Same with environmental protection, right? You do that to get away. I don't want to have to deal with industrial waste. So like I'm pro environment because I don't want lead in my water. Not because I get meaning out of having clean water necessarily. I just get degradation out of having lead in it. So I need that away. So that's a politics of just getting that stuff off of my plate. If you take that politics of getting stuff off of your plate and bring it to the political arena where you put stuff on your plate, that's going to be a problem. That's a huge problem because then you have all of these meaning-making institutions that you're treating like institutions of immediate freedom. Like, I break the law when I feel like it because the law is not really for me, or like I break the marriage and all the church, all this stuff works for me when it works, but then when it doesn't work for me, I just kind of toss it off because it's not because if it goes against my immediate desire and I can't do it in my immediate consent, then it's oppression. Right? So that is the problem with liberal anti-politics. It actually destabilizes all institutions. So what happens is you go from self-determining yourself as a thing, as a kind of thing, as a kind of person, to your characteristic feature being that you're unbound by all kinds of things, which means you're nothing and you're probably depressed, right? Because you don't have any meaning in your life. You can't even understand yourself. You're not tied to anything and nothing's tied to you. And you can't actually be anything because to be something is to like choose a constraint and work on it. choose a constraint to go after, like overcoming a different constraint and setting a new constraint. Kind of went over this a little bit. I foregrounded you. I'm kind of Mr. Miyagiing for the folks at home. If you look at my Politics and Infinity video from last week. But in order to self-determine, you need to have a self that overcomes given constraints by establishing new constraints. I self-determine myself as an engineer because I am the kind of person who has the skill to build a bridge from here to there. I can't overcome all constraints. I can overcome this constraint. And in that way, I distinguish myself from other people, and I am an engineer. Right? It's worthwhile not because it's on the market to go from here to here. It's worthwhile because we've decided that this is a constraint that we think that we should deputize someone and pay them and provision them to overcome. And that is real politics, not the politics. So you answer big questions in politics. You answer, and I wrote a few of them down. You answer big questions like what constitutes a cult versus a religion, because we have a freedom of, religion, but that doesn't mean you can, start marrying infants to people, right? So, and say it's part of your religion, right? So we have to decide what constitutes a cult and what's a legitimate religion. How do you tame or expand the market so that it's dynamic but not overly carnivorous? These are political issues. Do you fund cancer research or a space force? Like what gets produced and what obstacles get named as important? Right now, Black freedom is not an obstacle that gets named as important. So there isn't really a public purpose to securing Black people economic inclusion or, self-standing or self-determination, real self-determination. Right now, we live where white people say we can live. We lived in the South until white people chased, pretty much terrorized at least my parents over. My mom fled with the Great Migration to California, and California, the tech people in California have decided that I can't live there anymore by pricing us out, so Black people are fleeing California. So we pretty much are not self-determining, and our self-determination isn't really a problem for America. Unfortunately, we should make it a problem for America because then we make a public purpose out of figuring out how to overcome the constraints that Black America faces in securing its self-determination against more predatory forces within America. Right? So if you have a problem, institutions, you don't get rights by being a human. I'm going to do a whole nother show on this probably. Maybe the Friday after that. You don't get rights by being a human. You get rights by joining in institutions that then grant rights. And you get rights by being the kind of thing that can join in institutions that then grant the content of those rights will be determined by the institutions. So don't talk about human rights. Talk about institutions that are failing you. Insofar as an institution supposed to identify and help surpass constraints either given by nature or given by other people who are predatory on you, then that institution's not doing its job. So talk about, so why is this a liberal thing? Liberal things, like I said, they said they beat the pre-moderns at their game and saying no, I don't differentiate myself from other members of this community and my role as a member of this community based on what you say. I'll differentiate myself from other members of this community in my role as a butcher, baker, plumber, priest, whatever, based on what I say. And then we'll just kind of work as a community to figure out what all we need. And then we'll come up with the division of labor and risk rather than something that's not us come up with the division of labor and risk for us. Right? So liberalism was good that way. And it put it all towards the market. And it was like, yeah, it's great, dynamic, fantastic, great. I'm free from convention. I don't have to do what my grandparents did. The problem is going to be that the problem is going to be that emancipation from given convention is going to be confused for self-determination. And self-determination is really putting yourself under a convention that you actually had a say in determining. Not being unbound from all conventions. Being unbound from all conventions just means you're a flake who expects the world to just provision you somehow. Magic. So I hope that this has been clear. Self-determined, and this is actually, This is not what the founders fought for, right? The founders did not fight for freedom as flakiness. There's this great letter written in 1823. Thomas Jefferson's on his way out, writing to Adams about what he thinks heaven will look like, and he thinks heaven's going to look like Congress, right? Where you debate public problems like with your peers, and you distinguish yourself by how you debate public problems with your peers. You get your meaning through interacting in the institution, not by just being free to abandon it. You get your freedom by engaging, right? That's not healthcare. You don't get your freedom by your colonoscopy. The colonoscopy allows you to go and do other things without the fear of cancer. So I hope this has been helpful. So insofar as healthcare politics is an institutional issue, we need to talk about the provisioning of services and like this bill. Like I don't want like the oppression of healthcare is having to work 10 years to pay off a bad diagnosis, like to pay off for chemo or something like that. That's the oppression of healthcare. Your health is your health. You can have healthcare under an authoritarian regime. Look, under an authoritarian regime with a command economy and state church and asymmetrical marriages, you can have healthcare and environmental protection because those things aren't about necessarily democratizing power, right? Healthcare isn't necessarily about democratizing power. It's only about democratizing power when your health bill then comes to consume all of your free time and all of your work disposable income. That's a problem, but that's a problem in civil society. It's screwing up your civil freedom. Like something natural, like I said, a bad diagnosis or diabetes or whatever, is starting to screw up your ability to actually work for yourself or work and spend your own money your own way. That's a problem for your freedom. Right? And that's a problem as a civilian. That's not a problem as like a human. So this idea that we have human rights is distorted. Rights come from institutions. The question is the institution imposed upon you? In which case, like you have the rights that the institutional rights that, I don't know, that whoever authoritarian regime says you have, or do the rights you have is the institution an institution that you come up with, with peers. Either way, you're under a role. You're under an institution if you're going to want to be free. If you think freedom is this idea that you're unbounded by all institutions, what you really want is flakiness. And you're not going to actually be a thing. You're not going to be recognizable to even yourself. So if you have a problem with the way we've indicated or dictated which constraint matters in your life, find the institution and figure it out. Don't call it a human right. No, these are all institutional rights, and we labor under many failed institutions. Actually, Black America labors under a failed state. Like when you look at Black people getting hookworms and Black people having lead in their water and getting shot by the cops, like we are pretty much in an internal colony within a functional state. We are like under colonial governance, and your Black CBC members are just collaborationists. they're like the Jews who helped Hitler like gather other Jews in World War II. So look, Kamala Harris is a cop. Like I don't understand how we should be celebrating this in this America. I hope this has been helpful. Remember, rights come from institutions, not nature. Also, freedom doesn't mean unbound from all conventions. It means having a say in the convention. Right? It doesn't mean undetermined. It means self-determined. And that's a difference because your determination comes through the institution. Because you can't just give yourself a determination outside of an institution. I can't just say, I own that car. And because I'm self-determined, I can now like just get in and take the car. That's not how freedom works. No, like the freedom to own that car comes through the institution of property, which is recognized by other people who then have the capacity to say, like, even though I really want the car, I know it's his, so I won't take it. In that way, you have rights within the institution. And that's self-determining insofar as you have decided what constitutes a property right. Or like we have decided what kind, like tax policy, so that cars don't get repossessed or whatever. So insofar as you have a say in the institution, a fair say and knowledge, then you are insofar as you have a fair say, then in the institutions that you put yourself under, you're free. You are self-determining. So you have to have the ability to persuade and be persuaded and participate in the public process and all of that. Good. So I hope this has been helpful. Tell all your friends. Anti-politics is unfortunately very popular. I'm trying to fix that, but I am but one Negro. And if you like what I'm doing, you need to go to www.funkyacademic.com and sign up. Peace. If you appreciate the work I do every week and you think that I should continue to do it because I'm giving you the quality of political knowledge and insight that will help you not squander your life and kind of rescue meaning from it, then go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50 a month, or make one enormous donations. I like the monthlies because it allows me to budget more, and that'll help me, with a marketing budget or getting better equipment that works all the time. Because in a lot of ways, freedom means having equipment that works every time you turn it on. And I want to be a free Negro. So if you like what I do, go to funkyacademic.com and contribute. Thanks often comes in the form of cash, and the site takes credit cards.